It's time to talk about guns in schools. Once again, sad but true. Stay tuned. Welcome, America. It is another Sunday night with the 8 Black Hands. Tonight, we're talking about guns in schools. And unfortunately, there's a news hook of a reason why we have to talk about guns in schools. In Nashville, Tennessee, a shooter walked into a Christian school during the day and shot out the doors, got into the school, killed multiple people in the school, including 3 children and 3 adults. So the story is becoming a little bit too common for us. This is probably, I think, the 13th or the 14th education-related gun-related crime this year, or shooting, as it were. And people are saying all the predictable things that go back many years ago. I don't know how many years it's been since Sandy Hook, but we had a person who entered a school during the day in Sandy Hook and killed multiple children. And we went through all of the process of public kind of performances that you normally get: politicians with their thoughts and their prayers, politicians with their arguing about what was at fault, and then nothing. And here we are years again later, with history repeating itself, because we're talking about shooting in Nashville, and we always have friends. That's the thing about this show, is we have friends, family, and we are connected because we are a connected people. We have a friend and fam who's going to join us tonight to talk about this very important situation, and that would be Shaka Mitchell. There he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Shaka Mitchell, education activist and advocate, good Christian, and all around family Black man. America, start seeing Black fathers. This is a Black father powered podcast. And tonight we bring you a Black father who has connection to the story that we're talking about. And before we dive in, fellas, welcome on a Sunday night. Let's have fellowship with each other and kick off. Welcome our guest, Shaka there. Wish it was under better circumstances than we have right now. But anything that comes to mind, top of mind first, for any of you all, that we should start with first as the most important part of having this type of discussion, this type of national discussion, because we've had it times before. We're going to have it again. So what's the most important thing that we should get out right away?
I think that we can't have this type of conversation without having a call to action. It's really easy for us to sit up and pontificate about what needs to be done, but if we're not going to be strategic in terms of how we're going to get guns off people that shouldn't have them, then it doesn't even make sense to have these types of conversations. My prayers are with the folks in Nashville.
I'm just running out of ways to talk about this with my 12-year-old because he heard about it. He's old enough to see it on social media. He'll see it on the news, try to turn it off, and he wants more information. And I mean, I just don't know what else to tell him. Like, school is supposed to be a safe space for kids. And like, I just am running out of things to tell him. So I was just troubled by it. So yeah, I'm just running out of things to say to my own children.
Yeah, I mean at the end of the day, it just seems there's a propensity and a pattern of targeting children, which I mean just speaks to the depth of sickness, that's nurtured in this country, and the fact that nothing happens, you figure since Columbine till now, I don't even know. I mean, we can look it up just to see how many school-based shootings there have been. Um, and folks didn't do anything after that, not after Sandy Hook. And so it's like a real, just it's just unbelievable. I read somewhere where Australia had a shooting, and they changed laws, and they haven't had one since.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we'll get into more of that. Welcome, Shaka. Good to see you again. Sorry under these circumstances It just, it's almost become a pattern of just American life. Like it's no longer shocking. It's a matter of like, okay, when is the next one? Where will it happen? And how many children will be massacred?
Well, Shaka, thank you, number one, for being here tonight. We normally, when these debates come up, we're at a distance and they're not talked about as human stories. They're talked about as policy battles.
Yep.
You live right there. You said right before we started the show tonight that Nashville is still small enough to where you're 1 degree away from everybody or whatnot. What's the real human story here? Tell us some stories here about the human toll.
Yeah, sure. And thanks to all of you for having me on. And Sharif, I mean, I wish it was under different circumstances, obviously, but I'm here in Nashville, and I first came to Nashville in 1997 and moved back with my wife in 2008. So we've been here for a minute, and yeah, Nashville is kind of a mid-sized city. So you're only 1 degree, 2 degrees separated from people probably at almost any school in the city. This school is no different. I've got members of the church where we attend who send their children to this school. It's about 2 miles away from the Covenant School is about 2 miles away from the school where my 12-year-old attends. I've got former college roommates that send their kids there. I knew the headmaster at the school who was one of the victims. And so I think, just like the conversations that y'all are normally having on this podcast where we're talking about education, I think if we're talking about nearly anything else that is not centered around the student, then we're talking about the wrong thing, which is to say, I don't really want to hear conversations about the thickness of doors and entry points and bulletproof glass, etc. We just need to stop and lament and talk about what a tragic loss of life this is, both the 3 children and the 3 adults as well. And so it's been really hard. It's been a heavy week in Nashville for sure. And I think people are having a mixture of these personal conversations and then also thinking some about the policy, and eventually when is there going to be a tipping point? When do we say enough and we finally have the momentum to have some changes, some meaningful changes at whatever levels? I know we'll get into that, but people want to know, all right, when is it enough is enough? But
let's get into it now. What is the tipping point, and what is the change that we want to see in specifics?
Well, if I can just continue,
yeah, go ahead, sir.
Say, I think it just, when it comes down to brass tacks, I was actually speaking with a friend today, an older friend, and I said, I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I grew up throughout my school, career, I don't know if you call it that, history, whatever, that I never had to do any of the drills that my parents have told me about during the Cold War, during the sort of the height of the Cold War, where they were worried about being bombed, right? I never had to hide under a desk or practice that. I'm so thankful for that. But at the same time, now my children, and I've got 3, they are doing drills, active shooter drills. And that's a sorry state of affairs. No family wants to send their child to school thinking this is it. This could be it. There's a fair chance that this could be the day. That's a crazy proposition, I think. And so I sort of think, like, what are we trying to avoid? That's what we're trying to avoid. So at base level, like, that is an unacceptable state, regardless of what type of school, because this is not about that. It's just like, that is not the scenario in which we want to be sending our children. So that for me is kind of like where you start. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. I guess picking up off of that, where's our producer? Sir, hi. I guess picking up off of that, man, I had a instance last week in which we had a threat. So a kid had sent in a threat via social media, and I always said, in my mind at least, that I would never run a school that needed security guards, that needed an armed presence in order for me to be on its campus, because I feel like in doing so, it's not a school anymore; it's a prison. But after that instance, and after this whole Nashville 6 thing, I'm to the point now to where I'm ready to revisit that, because again, my daughter goes to my school, and so it puts a new spin on things when you got to worry about your own child as well as 1,000 other kids and them being safe. And so for me, it's like, man, this is tough, man. This is a tough conversation. I'm glad that we're having it, Chris. I'm glad that you're facilitating it, and I think that this is one of those things to where, like, this is why we're here. This is why we are a Black Father powered podcast, to where we can like lay it all on the line. So I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I live with the contradiction of wanting kids to feel safe to schools and not really being a fan of police in schools, SROs, metal detectors, and like prison-like conditions in schools. But similar to Ray, I had a conversation with our son's principal immediately after this and said, hey, I know I probably shouldn't ask you this, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Like, what's the plan if something like this happens here? Like, what? I know it's unthinkable, but like, I'm concerned. And we had a long conversation, and I never thought I would bring myself to have this conversation at my son's school. And I really worry about our youngest son, who's 6, who's identified as being on the autism spectrum and high functioning, because loud noises, he has noise sensitivity. And if something like this happens and they have to go into lockdown, it worries me about how he will respond and how that might impact other kids. And I think that's sad to me, because it's just another layer of shit.
Yeah.
That I just don't know what to do. Whereas, I want to feel like I can protect my kids even when they're not here and give them the skills to navigate, but I don't know what to say to a 12-year-old. I don't know how to explain this to our 6-year-old. And he's gifted in mathematics. But like the sounds, like he is sensitive to loud noises. I just worry to my core about what happens. And then the other thing, while I worry about it for my own children living in Fairfax County here in Virginia, I also live with the contradiction that this happens on a consistent basis in Detroit, in DC, and the way in which we respond to it is very different. Like, it doesn't gather the same type of media attention about violence in Philly or these other urban spaces. And I certainly am not playing the violence Olympics. And I think violence is violence and gun violence is gun violence. But the reality of it is that wherever it happens, we've got a gun problem in the United States of America.
Yeah, and on that point, here's an article right here that says, actually, let's go to this one. This is a pretty daunting headline. There have been more mass shootings than days in 2023, a database shows. There have been 128 mass shootings so far this year. And if folks want to find this, you can find it at ABC News. Just search for there have been more mass shootings than days in 2023. That's a pretty daunting headline, and this headline is actually the problem. This is the genesis and the root of the problem. Ray's a Republican, I'm a Libertarian, Sharif's an independent. We all believe in gun ownership as a possibility, meaning if it's for you or whatnot. But I don't think any of us are so crazy that we think crazy people should have the easiest of access. It's harder to get into a strip club than it is to buy a gun in the United States, right? And it just shows that the length to which we will do mental gymnastics in the United States to not actually solve actual problems, because they're big lobbies. And, if we were to fall down the rabbit hole of this, the gun lobby doesn't want you actually touching anything about guns. They're the most inflexible, recalcitrant force in the United States. We can talk about unions. We can talk about other big businesses or big tech or whatnot. Big gun is the largest kind of recalcitrant, non-rigid, non-flexible group that they don't even want you talking about crazy people not needing to have guns, right? Or have access to guns, right? And that is something that makes us the laughing stock of the world. Every other country that looks, the whole world looks at the United States and says, we don't have any more compassion for you when these things happen, because you're so stupid. You're literally the dumbest country on planet Earth when it comes to this point. Oh, the Constitution, the Second Amendment, this and that and the other. Listen, we said something. I heard one of you guys say it. And it strikes right at the core for me as a father. When I personalize these type of stories, and Shaka knows one of the victims involved here. When I personalize these type of stories to my own kids, and I think about what these babies were going through when they hear shots and they're being locked down in their buildings, and then somebody that they know personally in these moments when they're so traumatized and have so much fear is no longer with them anymore after that day, right? When I think about all of them, Columbine and Sandy Hook, and Robert, as you mentioned, in our cities where guns are out of control, and we have young people walking around who have an experience I've never had, which is to be a kindergarten, second grader, third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader in the middle of the day, hearing pop, 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 pop in your building, and then being rushed in great danger to be locked down, and then someone is not there anymore, right? If America doesn't have compassion for what I just said, and we keep treating these policy debates as if there's no answer, as if there's nothing we can do. The shooter in this case, I'm going to shut up after this. The shooter in this case was somebody that was known to have serious mental illness problems and was hiding it from his or her parents. And they knew that this was a person who didn't need to have guns. And this person had a gun, had access, bought multiple guns, as a matter of fact, over a period of a couple of months. Not just had access into them, easy access, quick access. There are things in the United States, like it'd be harder for some people to get a pack of cigarettes than it would be to get something that can do mass shootings. I don't know when we're going to get serious.
Not the menthols. They can get them.
Well, only because they have uncles like you, apparently. I mean,
Chris, this is the thing, right?
Yeah.
I gotta say this, right?
Yeah, say it.
As someone who has registered my kids to go to school, there's more paperwork and shit you gotta do to enroll your kids in schools than you do to have to get a gun in the state of Virginia. How is that possible? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. When I bought a gun in Virginia, you know what held me up? Was because I'm the third and my daddy has been in prison. That's the only thing that the police called me and were like, so are you Robert Simmons? Yes. And I knew where this was going right away. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, wait a minute. That's what y'all calling me about? Like, I don't even have no rap sheet. Like, what are y'all talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it was just mind-blowing to me as I'm sitting there like, and my wife held out from getting a gun. And I talked to Ray about this. And she finally was like, yo, it's getting crazy out here.
We got hammers in here, baby.
She was just like, I got a buckle and like, we got to do something.
I mean, listen, I don't have a problem with you and your wife having a gun. I don't have a problem with Ray having guns. I don't have a problem with anybody having guns. I'm a Jesus person. I believe we should turn our weapons into plowshares. But
that is not true.
That being said, that is very true. But that being said, you do need to defend yourself sometimes. And I don't think that everybody and their mama needs to be having access to guns when they're having mental health problems with no background check,
fair
no
enough.
kind of process, no training, no anything that they have to go through. gun show loopholes, just showing up and buying, you know, a bunch of guns that end up used in crimes that are killing young kids. When you talk about the cities that we have a problem in, there have been like 12-year-olds sitting doing their homework and have a bullet come through the wall of the house and knock them out. People don't think that I'm talking dramatic. Google these things. There have been kids sitting inside their house, not doing anything, not having anything to do with outside, and getting shot because bullets are flying like it's the damn wild west. And yet we just act like, well, you know, don't know what we can do. What can we do? How can we have our guns and eat them too? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but part of it gotta, you know, we gotta, you know, some of it is just changing the Constitution. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, it has to stop being looked at. I know this is just drive white folks crazy. But like, you know, I mean, they have such a whack mesmerization with these, you know, chalk wig haired racist rapists, like that. They're just, you know, like it just makes no sense to me that they think that this document is so pure, so clean, so, you know, amazing that it can't, you know, they'll add some amendments here and there, but you know, like something like this where children, and you know, somebody put in the chat, like, yeah, after Sandy Hook, when they saw that with their own kids and they didn't change, like, you know, like it's just, I mean, without some serious change to the Constitution, I just don't see, you know, things different, because that's what they lock onto, like, oh, this is a you know, the Second Amendment, like, and you know, and the problem with the Second Amendment is tied to so much other lunacy, correct, in this country. It is such a deep correlation to just the craziness that happens, you know, in this space, man. And you're right, Robert. You brought up, you know, like the gun violence, you know, and you know, a kid walk into one of our Philly schools, man. You know, Gratz, you know, was like basically ambushed in the morning on the way to school. You know, kids coming to school informing the staff of what they just saw, which was a kid murdered, you know, on the way to school. And so it's you know, it's over and over and over and over again.
And the kids like internalize it as part of, like,
culture.
Yeah, we see it as a news hook or a news story. The kids internalize it over
They live
time.
in this. Yeah.
They live in it. Yeah. And you know, just there's a school, I'm not going to name the school. There's a school that I donated to because I really liked the mission of the school. And because of that, somehow I got on their newsletter. And, you know, for all y'all leaders of schools and whatnot, stop doing that. Stop signing me up for stuff just because I do one thing with you one time or whatever. Like, I just want to stay in touch with you.
Donated no bread.
Because I got, well, you don't need it. But I mean, like, you know, so anyways,
you know, I donated to Sharif once and never heard from him again.
Me either.
What?
Me either too. Me
That's
too.
a whole show in
Me
and of
too.
itself.
That is the ungrateful. But anyway,
no, we said thank yous. We don't add you to the list. You know,
I appreciate that.
Like,
don't.
No,
you know? You added me to your list too.
You
but
got
anyways,
thank you.
No. Your team added you. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, let me finish it just to say.
Go ahead.
Over time, because I get this dispatches from this school, what I have noticed now, it's been a couple of years, is that every time there's an in memoriam for one of their students, it's in the newsletter. So it's become a normal part of their communications to me as somebody who formally donated to the school, that if I stay with them over time, it's going to be communicated to me over time. Their students are dying on the way to school, at a party, at a football game, at a whatever. That's just a normal part of their life. It's crazy.
Can I say something about
jump in here, sir?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so many different facets to this, which is one reason I think the conversation about what to do next becomes so tricky, right? Because, and we've mentioned some of them. We've mentioned things like mental health, the Constitution, just gun culture in general. You know, I think there's many different facets. People talk about, well, there's estimates of more than 400 million guns in circulation in the US already. So even if you banned all firearms, you know, you still got all the stuff in circulation. So there's lots of different issues. Just a quick like anecdote on gun culture, and unfortunately how pervasive it is. So this week, for the Nashville shooting, our church was hosting what's called a lament service. So it's really just it's just what it sounds like, a time to get together and lament and just say, you know, why, right? And to kind of cry out and be together and be with one another in fellowship. Okay. So that service started at 6:30. I show up with my family 10 minutes early or something, and one of our security volunteers in the parking lot pulls me aside and says, "Hey, by the way, there is an active shooter event happening 3.5 blocks away." And sure enough, some of our church members, as they were coming off the interstate to our lament service for 6 victims of gun violence, they were driving past and see 2 guys in a shootout with one another. It's just crazy, right? So you can be a victim of gun violence on your way to a service to commemorate and lament victims of gun violence. Like that's just a crazy scenario. And I will agree with part of what Sharif said about the Constitution. I'm very much a constitutionalist, I guess, or a textualist. Like I think the words matter. But here's the thing. We were also at least had the foresight, or the framers had the foresight to build in a system by which you can change those words, right? So the amendment process is nothing. And we amended the Constitution before because we wanted to have access to martinis again, right? That's something our country did. We thought it was so important to make sure we could get booze that we amended the Constitution. This, to me, seems more worthy to, I don't know what the language would say, but I'd be willing to amend it, and let's see what happens.
Well, the current language says
you're a sane person.
Current language says a well-regulated militia. It doesn't say your Uncle Skeeter, who don't know shit about shit, should have a gun. So the words are already that. Actually, the language is actually already there. What the gun lobby has done is said, "Do you believe the Constitution, or do you believe your lying eyes?" Right? Like, don't listen. We can argue about the constitutionality. First of all, I'm going to just pick on a couple things. Number one, those framers didn't have foresight in nothing. They were not divine people. They were not people that had some sort of prophetic blah blah blah. They were like 20-something to 40-something-year-old white men with powdered wigs sitting in a hot ass room trying to figure out how they were going to split up the spoils of the biggest luck that any group of people had ever had at that point, and how they were going to keep the peasants down by building a system of rules that would keep Shays Rebellion at bay.
This is how you get us in trouble, man. This is why we get in trouble all the time.
We got to stop acting like we're not educated people, and that we're not Black people living in a country where we have actually read the documents and have gone through the histories. We can't be sitting around here talking about this isn't like Disneyland, like where you have the robotic presidents coming up saying like 5-minute speeches or whatnot. That's not for us. That's for somebody else. Let's just be real with each other right now. And please, for the love of God, don't teach your children this nonsense unless you want to make them slaves. But anyways, even within mental slavery is real. But even within those imperfect framers and groomers documents, right?
Groomers.
Well, I mean, listen, Thomas
Slave
Jefferson
owners?
was one of them.
Yeah,
He was groomers. He was a groomer. He was straight up groomer. Anyways, let's stay on topic. Just to basically say, even within their words and their imperfect system of things, whatever, it has already been argued that they didn't mean for just everybody for all time, forever, just to be walking around loaded with a gun, regardless of what danger you present to society. So well-regulated militia.
I got a question for Shaka. And so you're in Tennessee, and so unfortunately, this event happened in Nashville. You're close to it, but there's also things that are happening every day in Memphis, right? That don't get highlighted in the media in terms of gun violence, in terms of kids losing their lives. We'll see a post from like members of Memphis Lift and like all sorts of members of the Memphis community about death being rampant in Memphis. What do you feel like is the major difference in terms of like why there's not that much notoriety in Memphis?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a tremendous secret. There's big differences between Memphis and most other cities in the state of Tennessee, right? I mean, Memphis is a predominantly African American right? City. It's a predominantly, I think you'd say, low or lower income, communities. There's no political juice, right, in Memphis like there is in some other cities. It doesn't, and so I think you could very much, as Robert mentioned earlier, you could very much say like, hey, but what do we do with, there's a shooting in Nashville and it seems to be treated one way. There are shootings in Memphis more frequently, or there are shootings in Memphis and they are treated a different way. I will actually say that a Nashville zip code actually has the highest incarceration rate and shooting rate in the country. Those are Nashville zips, which is a lot of people don't realize when they're wearing their boots and they're riding their pedal taverns in downtown. But so there's some disparities there. I think, though, something that I think will be interesting about in the aftermath of the Nashville shooting is I think that, and maybe you can pull it up, Chris, but there was a pretty significant rally on what must have been Wednesday down at Thursday, rather. It was Thursday at the Tennessee General Assembly, is our capital. And, people down there, it was a peaceful rally, but people are just expressing their frustration, right? Because the state legislature was meeting and folks are down there. I could see in the pictures and just saw on social, I knew a lot of people down there, and a lot of the people who are down there are not politically left of center. They're actually right of center. And I think that's really meaningful, right? Because I personally think that's where, if you're going to get movement on this issue, I think that's where the movement on this issue is going to come. I think it's actually going to come from right of center, from people who maybe, the gun lobby thinks they have, but maybe they don't, right? Maybe it's people who, have historically kind of voted for the GOP, and they say, hey, that's a political party that I want to be with. But you know what? I still don't want to send my kids to a school that feels like they are, they need SWAT training to be able to make it home after school. I think so. That's where I think that the change is going to come.
Everybody's like, scratch the beard. You think the change is going to come
I do.
People that are starting to have a change of heart, that are on the right, more on the right, but they're starting to have a change of heart.
I think so. I mean, maybe, and I don't know, maybe I'm still too close to kind of the initial, right, to the event on Monday. But I mean, maybe here's an analogy. When do we start to see laws get serious about opiates?
Oh,
it's,
man,
right?
Yeah,
it's not when it's
criminalized. It's criminalized when, yeah.
That's right. It's not when, heroin is really rampant in our cities, right? In our predominantly Black cities. It's when pills are being transferred in the suburbs, in the exurbs, in classrooms by kids, right? Now, that's a problem. There's problems there. But if the underlying effect, or if the underlying event, i.e. these opiates that are just rampant across culture, if that can be addressed, then it's kind of like, all right, let's address it. There's still those other disparities, right? So I'm not putting those aside, but I just think that maybe this is going to be analogous to that.
I'm out of this shit.
Yeah, here's where I would disagree, right?
Sure.
In that I hear you, right? And like, I think that's a glass half full approach, right? Like, I don't disagree that intellectually, I would think that this would be it. But like, this isn't the first time. Like, I looked online, and there's been 376 school shootings since Columbine. 376 and over, I don't know, 300,000 or whatever the number of kids who've been impacted because inside of the school, right? If that's not enough, I'm not sure that will be it. But the one thing that I've always said is if you want to see gun laws change, let more black people go buy guns and show up publicly carrying and open carry.
Man, they be all these governors be Ronald Reagan all over again after
It's Reef's mic.
they showed up at
It's
Sacramento.
Reef's mic that's giving all the feedback.
You got something going on, Reef, with your mic there. Sounds like you're in the fan. Remember back in the days, old days when we used to stand by the fan and be like,
Roger Troutman, computer love.
Yep. This is pre auto tune. Before auto tune, it was like
he still got his auto tunes going.
That used to be fun. I don't know what y'all talking about. That was like a national pastime.
it wasn't fun. Damn big ass fans blowing hot air around your house, hot air because your parents didn't want to.
Can you get the camera off, Rob?
Didn't want to share.
No, Rob.
This is true. Robert, I didn't know that Robert was done with his point 100%. So
no,
listen,
the one point about that, like Ronald Reagan changed laws after the Panthers showed up, right? In California.
Yeah.
Not as a president, as a governor, right? Like they started restricting and but it's like, yeah, I mean, you see more and more black gun ownership and things like that. I think they'll just unleash the AFT, what is it? ATF, the
AFT too. They unleash the
AFT. We're not doing that right now.
We're not doing that. We're not doing that tonight. Just stop it.
The FBI and everybody else. I don't think that's going to get them to change those laws. That they tie back to the Second Amendment. They're just going to sick their goons on us.
Well, truth be told,
I think things could change in Tennessee. They may not change nationally, but if you have people that are center right or right that are showing up to these things and whatnot, and they have the political juice in order to make those folks that are on the right move, then they'll move. It'll happen.
I hope so. I hope so.
They're having protests right now. They have people that are shouting down elected officials.
But they don't have like France and Spain type protests. You know what I mean? Like they need like some more Iranian, France, Spain.
With your violence.
I'm just saying, like, violence. I'm like, without that type of protest, like they, I don't know.
They don't need violence.
And I don't mean the violence part. I mean just like that kind of massive amount of people shutting things down, right? Like what they do, they're like, we're not going to work, like just shutting a country down. Like you see,
but we're too comfortable in the U.S. to shut things down very long.
That's what I was saying. Like I got to get my $10 latte. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say, and you just don't wish this on anybody. But you think about what are the things that maybe move the needle. And the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, had a personal connection with that school. His wife used to teach with the headmaster. One of the other victims, who is a tutor, 60 or 61-year-old tutor, retired teacher, and then she was back there just tutoring, was set to have dinner with the governor's wife that night. So there's a personal connection. So, maybe it's those types of things, right? I mean, sometimes it's not the words. It's not the words in the Constitution. It's not the laws on the books. It's the life on life connection that may matter. I don't know. Of course, I wouldn't. I don't wish that on anybody's friends, but that might be one of those things that matters.
And, and those are the exact type of people we don't need in politics, right? Like if it has to happen to you personally before you feel for everyone else. Like that's the exact wrong person to be leading anything.
Well, you might be right, but in the law, sometimes we say, "Don't tell me the law, show me the judge." Right? Like that's what you're doing. Sometimes you play the man.
Yeah. Well, here, according to your paper, The Tennessean, it says that Governor Bill Lee moves to boost school safety funding, and he's open to some gun reform after the shooting. To Sharif's point about this is, if it requires you to know somebody personally that gets into a tragedy before you start reconsidering your policy positions, That's a problem. And, Shaka, I get what you're saying is like, like politics just is what it is. Like whatever it takes to move the needle to get you where you want to go, you have to go with it. But I will say America has a empathy problem. Like at root, we don't need the violence protest as much as we need a serious reconsideration of what the hell is wrong with us. When you have 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds being shot, and that's not what triggers your empathy. And that isn't who you want to see coming in your congressional office. You're waiting for the goddamn gun lobby to come through with that check. That's a much bigger, deeper spiritual problem about powers and principalities that aren't exactly Christian, right? That is a much bigger soul problem of the United States. And as I said earlier, we're an outlier. Other countries look at us as we talk all this bluster about how great we are, how we're number one, we're blah, blah, blah. We're number one, but not number one in healthcare, not number one in education, not number one in math, not number one in science, not number one in, infant mortality, not number one in any of these great indicators, including number of kids getting shot down and killed by crazy people with guns during their school day. We like to, we're number one. You know what we're number one is? We're number one in thinking we're number one when we're not. That's what we're number one on. We're number one in a lack of empathy. This country is so without empathy. You got people ripping babies out of the hands of mothers at the border and not thinking that that's somehow a spiritual problem motivated by evil that eventually will come back on your soul and haunt you at some point. We're so pragmatic about our policies that we don't even think about the moment you strip a baby from the hand of a mother at the border. We fall for stunts like putting them on planes and sending them up north and not telling them where they're going without any blankets or jackets or food or anything along the way. The exact opposite of the Christian principles of the thing that we always like to say we have, these Christian principles. We're missing the part where he said, thou shalt love your neighbor as you love yourself. Hang the whole of the law on that. Yeah. We keep forgetting about that part. Hang the whole of the law on that, right?
Shaka, man, you in the middle of the Bible Belt.
Shaka's a Christian person too. Shaka, help me out here, man.
Yeah, so
it sounds like Chris is trying to rejoin the church and state. You know what I mean?
Stop it.
Shaka, what are the folks saying in the church?
Yeah, I mean, I think the church, like anything we've seen, is not monolithic. You have a lot of folks who just have a mixture of, I think it's a mixture of opinions of what to do. I don't think there's a mixture of emotion, meaning like I have not experienced people who are just so callous that they just don't even think about it and just go, not a big deal, right? I don't know anybody like that. But yeah, I might put it.
Let's stick on this point just for 1 second.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody that is making this about the shooter being trans rather than it being about dead people?
That is something that I have to say. I've been so my wife realized that. I mean, she read that, I guess, that update before I did, and she said, "Oh boy, I think this is going to be a problem. I think this is where it's going to go." I actually think that has been more of a narrative that I've seen in national outlets than in local ones.
Yeah.
In local outlets, I haven't seen anything. I mean, I've heard people at the same prayer vigil, praying for the parents of the victims and the parents of the shooter. Right. So I really have to say, to me, that's been much more of a national thing where you have some of kind of the usual suspects in the national media just trying to like stoke the rage machine and inflame it. Whereas I think you've got people who are still grieving and are like, listen, this was not about that. Now, I will say, here's something that I thought was a huge miss. I did hear a conversation. I won't say with who. But it was a conversation where people said where they were frustrated with the media coverage. And I said, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" They said, "Well, I'm frustrated with how the media covers these things because they were frustrated that whichever reporter they saw didn't accurately described the weapon, like called it an AR-15, and it was really some other kind of gun. And I sort of went back to the point that I started with on this show, where I said, listen, if we are talking about the serial number or the does it hold 30 rounds or 31 rounds? Like, we're talking about the wrong thing. The thing we should be talking about are the lives lost, especially of these children in what should be an educational setting. It was a miss to me to kind of get lost in these details of, was it this kind of gun or was it that kind of gun? Yeah. But among folks in the church, like, I think people are grieving, and there is, and I mean, Chris is right. I'm an evangelical Christian. Do I believe there is an individual sin problem? Yes. Facts. A problem with the heart? Yes. Do I think you can also have some issues that are group problems? Yes, I do believe that too. And still, do I think that we, notwithstanding those things, like, those shouldn't cause us to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, human nature, that is unacceptable.
I love the sound. Yeah, you're right.
I do my own sound effects. Yeah.
He's a wah wah wah. Yeah, but from a Christian perspective, I want to speak for everybody. Not everybody on this podcast is a Christian, but I will say this: there are no individuals in Christianity. Christianity is a community. It is a kingdom, and within that kingdom, there are supposed to be ways in which we're supposed to solve our problems, and love should be at the bottom of all those. Now, we don't really talk about this when we talk about the formulation of public policy. When we talk about the way that, because we live in a fallen world, and one of the clearest signs of a fallen world to me is that we have children, babies, who are falling down, dead, being traumatized. You just mentioned the thing, even if this isn't something that happened to you or whatnot, even the drills, like, the idea that you have to do these lockdown drills with kids or whatnot, you're drilling into I remember the 80s, how crazy this was when we used to have to do these bomb drills. And there was this general sentiment that, like, Russia could bomb us at any second and we were going to, like, just fry and whatnot. I don't know why parents do this sort of thing and adults do this sort of thing to kids, because that scared the hell out of me for a good 10 years, that, like, thinking that any moment now this thing could happen, right? And first of all, educators, but you be lying to kids. Listen, if they drop a nuclear bomb, what is getting under your desk gonna do? Nothing. That's the best desk in the whole world if that's gonna protect you. What is that desk made out of? Get under the desk with a nuclear bomb. Anyways,
it does about the same as you having to pour out your 4 ounces of shampoo before you get on, when you're carry on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
With your $80 bottle of cologne, talking about, like, I'm gonna pour this out or leave it behind, whatever.
Reef, cool water is $80 now.
Stop it with your Drakkar wearing self.
So that was lost on me. You should send your corny jokes to somebody else so that they get it.
Return home. Well, fellas, like, listen, this is one thing I always like to come back to. We don't have, like, a ton of time on the show here today, but what do you think actually we should be telling our kids and our young people? That's really where we land most of the time on these things. We talk about them, we argue about the larger issues and whatnot, but it all comes back to 8 million Black children is what this podcast is about, and we're trying to raise them up to be the best they can possibly be. This has got to be a moment that we teach something. So what do we teach? Ooh, look at that. I stumped the educators. Look at that. The least educated one on the podcast and stumped the educators. Come on, fancy book learning. Somebody jump in here.
Let me stop you. You're not the least educated person on the podcast. If you take your formal education and your lived experience, you are the most educated on the podcast. So stop saying that shit.
Wow, I appreciate you. Listen, I appreciate you. Come on, fancy book learning.
So, can you state your question again?
What should we be teaching young people? This is a moment. It's a hotspot moment in time. We know what they might be dealing with. When these type of things happen. What's our pedagogy in moments like this for our young people?
So I'll jump in.
So
I think that we have to teach our kids to have their heads on a swivel. We have to teach them how to be aware and how to be able to pick things out in terms of when these things happen. And so not only are they having drills at school, but we're also having drills at home because, my kids are my most valuable resources, and I don't want anything to happen to them. If I can do something to control it, or if I can put them in a position or empower them to be able to control it, right? When the teacher gives you a directive in terms of keeping you safe, we need to make sure that our kids are following those directives. We need to be checking in with school leaders to make sure that they are actually doing these drills, because what happens is people get complacent because it's not happening in your area. But these are the types of things that can happen. Nobody knows when it's going to happen. So you always need to be prepared for it. I know every state mandates that you have to have a certain amount of tests and a certain amount of drills every year. But just making sure that you're checking in with those school leaders and making sure that they are doing those actual drills. I think that if we do that in partnership, we can help keep some kids safe.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I put a couple links in the chat where, students were organizing and lifting their voice. I think they have to continue, to do that and do it, and adults have to show up as well. But I think it has to be this ongoing, massive chorus about just demanding that things change. And literally, I do think they're going to have to. We are going to have to shut some things down, to where they feel it financially. Like I really think that's the only spaces. Like it's, when you think about when they wanted, Dr. King's birthday that happened, and there was a couple of state holdouts, right? And they, there were more people just demanding that, saying like, hey, we'll pull your favorite pastime out of this state if you don't change that. You're right. Like it's those kind of things, I think, that it's going to take everybody. But I really, would continue to encourage students. There were some students at Girls High that organized, students. There were a few years ago, Shoemaker students, the Raised Woke group, was organizing and collaborating with other folks. I think, another part to dovetail with this is really just us checking in, and engaging our youth more. When we just see, even without these kind of murderous rampages, we saw mental health issues spiking with our students, anxiety levels, depression, spiking with our students, and this only exacerbates that significantly. So I would say a big part of this is making sure we are staying engaged and speaking with our children, our youth, and making sure that they have the environment to do the same, with us, and sharing. Because even in between all of these mass murders, even if they're miles away, students are seeing and experiencing this in a very, very different way, than adults who may see it on the news and like, oh yeah, well I live in such and such, or that's not close, or like that doesn't change how a child may internalize it. And I really shudder, like how these children who have experienced this the past, couple of decades, especially, what this means for them and their grandchildren, like what trauma is going to be passed on. Because all this it's not just the kid in front of us; it's their grandchildren that will be dealing with the effects of this kind of nonsense.
Shaka, since you were there, first of all, is this a teachable moment for your kids? Is it something they know about? Is it something that you have to address and talk about?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, we've had to talk about it. I mean, you had schools closing early. The security presence, obviously at pickup and drop off has been much higher. You're doing drills. So now it hit my kids at they're different ages. So it kind of hit them each differently. My 8-year-old isn't really that aware. My 10-year-old asks lots of questions. She said today, in fact, this afternoon, she said, "Daddy, what was the country where you said that the police don't carry guns?" I said, "Oh, we were talking about England." And she said, "I wish we were like that." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because then maybe," she said, "then maybe what happened this week wouldn't have happened if people didn't have guns." She said, "At least it would be less likely." And I thought, it's not really that complicated, is it? Like, she gets it. She's 10. The numbers matter. But so, yeah, I do think it's a teachable moment. I think I might try to teach them, to to the effect that they'll listen to me. A couple things come to mind. Like one, I really, we can't let our kids think that certain problems are so intractable that we're just going to do nothing. And so that's one thing I think we have to teach them.
That's
like,
huge.
You're right. It does seem like a problem that, man, a lot of smart people have thought about and they haven't figured out what to do yet. Guess what? Keep working. You might be the one. This might be the problem that you are here to help us solve. And so I think they have to know that. The other thing, of course, let's do some like smart, reasonable safety enhancements, in buildings and public spaces, whatever, when we can do them. But it's like, who wants to live in a constant police state? I don't. Again, do them. The training matters, of course. But I think what I would tell my kids is like, let's think about, particularly in the US, why we're so reluctant to relinquish some of our supposed rights, and what that really, Chris, to your point, what that really reveals about us, right? Because I think it actually it does have a lot to do with kind of the heart. What does it reveal when we say, no, you know what? I just don't want to give that thing up for my neighbor, for my, in my community. Why is that? And I think those are the questions that we have to ask, and that I would challenge them to ask. Like, if you're holding on to something so tight that it becomes the priority, you need to ask why that is and what that reveals about you. Yeah.
That's deep, man. I really think that's deep. So as you were talking, I was like thinking to myself that one of the lessons that we are teaching kids is that we can't make everything perfect for them. We can't make them like, there's a point which you think your parents are like, have superpowers. You think that your parents can, like if a dog's coming towards you, jump behind your dad, right? And there's that sense of like, if the ghost is in your room and your parents come in the room or whatnot, it vanquishes all ghosts, right? There's a juvenile way of thinking of your parents as superheroes. And then you get to times like this, where your parents where the best message we have is we can't make everything in the world perfect for you. And there are lots of things that happen in this world that you have to watch out for, right? It's kind of deep. Well, listen, fellas, we are wrapping on time. Let's do a round of final words on this somewhat grim topic, but it's one that we needed to have because it's in the news as a major challenge to us to think about what type of society we want to be and what type of society we want for our kids. And definitely when it comes to schools, what type of society do we want to be for our kids and for our schools? So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Robert, you do your thing, sir.
I got 3 pieces to this. One, I want to encourage parents of kids who have special needs, are neurodiverse, to ask questions of school leaders and of districts and charter schools, wherever you send your kid to school, about what is their strategy for your child? Because they experience the world differently and they deserve to be safe just like every other kid, regardless of the ways in which they experience the world and regardless of how inconvenient it might be to the school, right? Like, so I want to encourage parents to have that conversation. The second piece is that I want to encourage young people to lead us on this, because adults ain't doing nothing. Like, I'm a pessimist on this one because I feel like it's the same conversation forever. Let's add more SROs. Let's have more, I don't know, metal detectors, and let's arm teachers, like all of these things, but there's never anything of substance. And I would encourage young people in the same way in which they've organized over the years and the generations, would encourage them to lead us and lead walkouts and lead protests, come with a policy agenda. The third thing is that one of the voices that's really important is teachers, and for all of the ways in which there are teachers that are just demonized in the media, celebrated in the media, whatever continuum we're on with that. I want to thank teachers for going back to work every day, because it has to be tough to know that you're not only protecting yourself because you may have a family to go home to, but you're also charged with protecting 30 kids, 20 kids, whatever the number of kids are in your classroom. And the same way that we celebrate those that are frontline workers and first responders, I think we need to celebrate teachers at moments like this and beyond, because I can't imagine what it's like to be a teacher in Nashville or in wherever and go back to school the next day knowing that this has happened. Like, I don't know what that would be like, because I haven't been a classroom teacher in a long time. And so I just would encourage teachers to galvanize and collectively raise their voices about what needs to happen and bring their experience and wisdom to the table. So, yeah.
That's dope. Ray, what about you, sir?
Oh, man. So first and foremost, we're going to have a emblem change. We got a mainstay on the show. This guy that has done the residency for the month of March is going to be joining us permanently, Dr. Robert Simmons. And so I want to congratulate him on being the newest hand. I was going to do a press release, but I didn't do that. I felt like it would be appropriate to do it now. All right. Secondly, I want to thank Shaka for pulling up and coming through and giving us the wisdom of being on the front lines in Nashville. And then thirdly, really want to say this. I want the same energy to go into all neighborhoods when these mass shootings occur. I want the same energy.
All right. Sharif. You on mute?
My bad. Welcome, Doc. That was a interesting segue announcement type of time, but it's to be expected. From our. I think I couldn't help but to think about Michael Cole. That was the first student that I lost to gun violence, and it was after he had graduated from our middle school at Turner. And I just remember the immense impact that had on the community. He was he was in neighborhood schools and just the entire community. And I still think about him often, and he was the first, but he wasn't the last. And I mean, something has to give. When we think about just the impact that these mass shootings are having on the psyche, and the last thing we need are our children to be in despair and feel hopeless. But you also understand like why they might feel that way when just seeing adults, just not doing a single thing when they're in deep distress, when the whole country is in deep distress in this way. And so, I agree with Simmons, making sure that we're supporting students and teachers and staff, those who are closest to these issues. And like we have to figure out other ways to add higher levels of pressure and will things to change. This is just too much. It's been too much. It's just way too much. Just indifference to children being murdered inside of schools, on the way to and from schools, in our communities, just the overall epidemic of gun violence in this country that was in the soil. Like, this is how this version of this country was founded. And this is going to take a massive effort to root this out, from within the soil, and do a deep cleansing of the politics, of the money that flows into the NRA and other spaces that just keeps this as the most protected, illogical concept, in this space.
Hey, Reef, you did you get a basement makeover in Lower Marion?
No, I got booted out my my office. This is really the library space. This is where I go. This is where I go to think and read. I got booted, man. My wife was
These
like,
are the random moments that nobody
very
who
random.
watches us can follow along with and understand what
The
we're doing
people
and what we're saying.
watching, the
You know,
people
so-
the people on the screen can't follow him. You know?
right, absolutely. Still bobbing and weave. Shaka, we're going to give you the last word, so I'll say my final word here, which is just, first of all, I'm appreciative of the discussion and the conversation, the ability to come to the show on Sunday nights and be able to conspire and have fellowship with smart and intelligent Black men, and especially Black fathers, because this is a salon for exactly that to happen. So I am grateful for that, and I thank God that we have that and the ability to model that for others. On this particular issue, I'm sick of having the conversation. I'm sick of talking about gun violence and students, and I'm sick of tragedies. I'm sick of having to do kind of national performative showing of like grief, and then nothing. We've had so many of these shootings and tragedies over time, and it's happened to every sympathetic group of people. It isn't just schools, right? We've had this happen in movie theaters. We've had it happen in churches. We've had it happen in nightclubs. You are not safe as an American, not because of anything other than the policies that are in place that make you unsafe. And the policies are in place because we have paid off politicians who care more and prioritize more the check that they get from the gun lobby than they do you. They are more afraid of the gun lobby than they are you. And there's no sympathetic group of people that they will act on behalf of to get in the way of that particular arrangement. So the only way out of this is for good people, good citizens, people motivated by their love of children, their love of a safe society and an orderly society, to make it a punishing offense for politicians who want your vote to do what they're doing right now, which is to be cowards and to hide behind the money that they get from the gun lobbies. I'm not trying to take anybody's guns away or take anything away from people that are supposed to have it, but there's just some common sense things. You should not be crazy as hell having direct access to guns. And we've seen it time and time again. The only way that we win this, there's only one way. And I hate to ever talk about anything in terms of one way. The only one way that is out of this is for the children lobby to be better than the gun lobby, for the love lobby to be better than the hate lobby. That is the only way out of this. Everything else is a losing premise. The idea that you negotiate over time, the idea that you make little tweaks and little changes, the idea that you go into long, like I said earlier, performative national discussions about these things that lead nowhere, doesn't work. It's over. It's over. So let's not keep having the same damn conversation over again, because I'm getting to be like your get off my lawn, like old and grouchy man. The next one of these that we have again, I'm going to say the same thing to you over and over again. And there will be a next one. That's the most, like, predicting people who understand pattern recognition, intelligent people who understand pattern recognition, probably should predict that we will have this conversation again until we actually do something. God help us if we keep doing the same nonsense. Shaka, thank you, number one. So for people listening and watching, Shaka Mitchell has joined us from Tennessee. He is a nationally known to rock a microphone. And you can see, look at him, look at his microphone. You can tell that this is a brother that is serious about his biz. But focuses a lot on making sure that young people have the opportunity to learn and that they get more choices and options than they have. But he came on tonight specifically to talk about this particular topic because it hits home. Shaka, I'm going to give you the final word here. What do you got to say, sir?
Well, again, thanks again. Congratulations to the newest permanent 7th and 8th black hand. So I'm glad you're back at full capacity. Two things. One, I would be remiss if I did not highlight the fantastic, I think, response by the Metro Nashville Police Department in this. I am a small L libertarian. I do not typically I don't tend to go out of my way to find out about all the good things that our local law enforcement is up to. I'm sure they're up to some fine things. This was a remarkably fast response. This was not Uvalde. And, I think a lot of additional tragedy was prevented because of that. And so Chief John Drake, who is a native Nashvilleian, went to high school at our local high school, actually, East High School. Really tremendous job there. So I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of give them a shout out. Really big time work there. The last thing that I will mention is when I was in middle school, I guess it was early high school, like my freshman year, I think. My father was a victim to gun violence. He lived, but was in Florida at the time, in Fort Lauderdale, and was shot multiple times. And I think a natural response to that kind of thing is to get angry. I mean, in times like this, with thinking about the school shooting at Covenant this week, I think about if something happened to my girls, what would be my response? And my initial thought is not that it would be gracious, right? I think about those movies, all these movies with Liam Neeson, where he says he has like a certain special set of skills, whatever, and it's like hunting down the bad guys to go exact justice because his daughter's been hurt. Like, that's what I think about. I think about Denzel as the, going out there and like finding all the bad guys. But I really have come to believe that like violence begets violence. And I think that a way, I don't know if it's out of this, but a way, to get away from, frankly, having to do these incessant active shooter drills in elementary school is to figure out how we stop being so fearful, because it's the fear that just begets more fear, right? And that's just the short game. We got to figure out how to play the long game. And the long game is, Chris, I think, as you mentioned, like, how do you lay down arms? Even if it's a constitution, how do you lay those things down so that you can play the long game and you can show what it is that you actually prioritize? And if we say that we prioritize children, let's see it. I think one way to show it would be to give them safe spaces where they can be in some cases a majority of their childhood, which is in a school building, in classrooms with teachers. Likewise, I think if we really value teachers and want them to be great at their craft, we should let them be great at their craft and not also figure out how they, need to be like, law enforcement tactician, sort of, quasi SWAT team members. But I think a lot of that just has to do with us getting away from violence and fear. And those are culturally embedded in the US in a way that they aren't in a lot of other countries. And so I lament that, but I'm hopeful that if we're intentional, and maybe it's the next generation, that we can change it, right? I don't want my grandkids to have to be doing these drills. So that's my hope.
I'm with you. I'm right there with you, sir. We need a love army and a love revolution, and it's going to come once we get sick of all the haters and all the hate in the world. This has been another episode of the 8 Black Hands. Tonight we've had a very special guest in Shaka Mitchell from Tennessee. We appreciate you and hope you will come back to the show again, sir. We will be telling you more, audience, about what's going on with the 8 Black Hands. There's some newness and some exciting changes that will come to the show and to the program as we work it out and roll it out. If you want to help us now with the show, you can do it by sharing the show with your friends and family. You can leave you can subscribe if you haven't subscribed in all the places where you can find us, including YouTube and on our podcast, on anywhere where you get the podcast, and you can leave us a rating wherever you see shows. You can kind of rate the show and rate it as amazing, rate it as good. And if you don't, you're raggedy. Just kidding. No, I'm not going to dish you like that. But say something good about us. Say something good about us. We appreciate you all. We'll see you next week on the 8 Black Hands. This has been episode 204.